again. So I promised that this channel would be not only a list of my practices for assessment for learning and standards-based grading, but also some of the troubles and the triumphs that I go through. So if you are just starting to get to work on trying to shift over to a more assessment for learning, standards-based type practices, perhaps you can avoid some of the struggles I had, or perhaps mine can give you some ideas. So my current struggle is my rubrics. It's taken me a long time to figure out the version that I like. I like the way they are now, where I've got an advanced, an intermediate, a basic, and an introductory column, and then the concepts in those columns tend to match the difficulty level that goes with the moniker. And I like the fact that my rubrics are kind of one sheet fits all. It's the same sheet that I give out at the beginning of the year. This is when I say, here's what you're going to do for the semester. It's the same sheet when I say, here's what your test is over, what you have to do on the test. It's even the same rubric that I use to grade the test itself. I put up a video, the last video was on how I do that with a test. So I like having one piece of paper, but with the advent of the next generation science standards, I'm having a hard time keeping it as one piece of paper. Because as I told you just briefly in the previous video, originally my rubrics were concepts. And so the easy stuff, things like calculating number of protons and electrons and neutrons, things like identifying types of matter, things like types of reactions, all those were in the introductory column, and then some of your more difficult concepts, things like configurations, and molar conversions would go in the basic, and then when you get into intermediate, that's where you find concepts like stoic and atypical configurations if you've got somebody that promotes an electron in a weird place, and so on and so forth. And so I really liked being able to weight concepts according to their difficulty level. But the next generation science standards give an application, more of a performance event, if you will, a performance expectation that I feel needs to go in the advanced column. And that's the rubric that I actually showed you in the last video was designed this way, where the application standard is the advanced, and then the intermediate, basic, and introductory are the same concepts that you need to do that application standard, but the intermediate column is all discrete questions. It's application-based still, but not quite as involved, and how you'd have 3 or 4 concepts in one question like you would in the advanced. Basic becomes being able to do the math, or just be able to write, what is the configuration for, or how many moles are there in 24 liters, or whatever. And then introductory becomes just definitions, knowing what the actual concept is. And I like that. When I first came up with it, I was really pleased because, once again, I was back to one single rubric. But I feel like I have put difficult concepts on par with easy concepts again. Take, for example, the rubric that I showed you in the last video, put configurations and subatomic calculations, protons, electrons, and neutrons, on equal footing, because that was the introductory column, to know the definition or the basic idea behind all these concepts. And I don't think that's right. You have to know how to calculate protons, electrons, and neutrons and all that nonsense in order to be able to do configuration. So to put them both on equal footing, it seems a little bit weird for me. I need to speak to the history teacher here at Valley Park, because I know he does more of a theme-based standard set, where he's got each of his standards are things like thinking like a historian, or the role that economy played in throughout history. And so I know he writes a different rubric for every test, and so he'll have 6 standards on a given test, because the China unit will have thinking like a historian, effective economy on the development of civilization, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But anyway, all of those pertain to China, pertain to medieval history, pertain to the United States, whatever. But so he's got these broad overarching standards, whereas in chemistry, I think mine are a little bit more discrete sometimes. And so I almost feel like I need 2 rubrics like that, where I've got one rubric that's got the concepts laid out according to kind of easiest to hardest, and then another rubric that has the performance event, but I can't figure out how to score it if I were to do it that way. So my current plan is to actually take the rubric that you saw before and to create kind of 2 sections in each of those columns. One section will be the define math apply, and then the performance event. And then kind of below that, I will move up some of the more difficult concepts. So for example, in the introductory column, it'll say have the basic idea or definition of subatomic particles and development of the atom theory and easy things like that. And then the basic column will say at the top is able to calculate number of subatomic particles, size of an atom, whatever. And then below that it will say be able to define configurations and maybe stair-step it up that way. And that way I could weight the harder concepts with the greater amount of brain power that it requires to actually understand those concepts. And so that's the idea that I'm toying with right now, because the more that I look at my standards, the one that I showed you yesterday, the more I'm not so sure I'm going to be able to use it, or I'm not sure the grades are going to turn out the way that I want. As I mentioned before, I am big on trying new things, and if it doesn't work, worst case scenario, it doesn't work. So I change things a lot, which I guess is good practice for my students, because how often does your boss say, hey, new protocol, or whatever? So I'm still on the hunt for a better way to do these rubrics, and I'll keep you posted as I keep working on them, because I like having the application as the advance. To me, that's what you need to be able to do if you want an A in my chemistry class. You need to be able to not only parrot back to me what subatomic particles are and what the periodic trends are, but you need to also be able to predict the properties of any element I give you on the periodic table based on that knowledge. So you have to apply those concepts and back up your statement that iodine is larger than sodium using configurations and periodic trends and subatomic particles, etc., etc. That application and that integration is really important when it comes to just real-world thinking. Even if you never go into a science field, that ability to take three discrete ideas and integrate them into a single whole is useful regardless of what field you go into. But some of those ideas are more complicated than others. And so for the kiddos that application is just out of their reach, I want to make sure that they are still given the credit that they deserve for being able to master even these more difficult discrete concepts. So if you have any thoughts, any suggestions for me, please do feel free to comment and throw in your 2 cents. This is the way I think. I tend to talk my way out and go badger my colleagues. So feel free to join in the discussion. 2 brains are far better than 1. And the interwebnet brain is even more than 2 brains. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight into the way that I formulate these rubrics and perhaps the thought process that I go through. Again, any thoughts, feel free to comment. Other than that, have a good day.